Hello, and welcome to the Farmhouse. I'm Candace Rosbowski.
And I'm Stephanie Spiker.
And today we're going to be talking with Amanda Bennett, an extension agent from Ohio State Extension. She specializes in many things, including crops, animal sciences, gardening, beekeeping. There's a full list online, and we were very impressed when we saw these credentials. Stephanie, you first met Amanda when you were at an event in Ohio.
Yeah, so I went out for the Farm Science Review in Ohio. It's this big ag expo put on by Ohio State, and one of the talks I went to was put on by Amanda, and she was talking about hydroponics for small farms. And yeah, I looked her up after the talk and I saw that long list of accolades she has that you were just reading, and I was like, oh, we gotta get her. She's got so much expertise on everything.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably best if we let her explain everything she's working on and how she became an expert in so many fields, and we'll get to that in a minute. But first, we wanted to talk about another story that's currently on LancasterFarming.com because we thought it was a fun story and it kind of fits with this podcast. And the title of that story is, What is Feral Woman Fall and How Can You Embrace It? And this is by friend of the podcast, Shelby Watson Hampton. So, Steph, what does it mean to be a feral woman? Because the phrase does bring quite an image to mind if you're not familiar with the brand of feral woman that Shelby is talking about.
Yeah. Well, first of all, the first thing I thought when I read this article was, forget brat summer, it's time for feral woman fall. Which anyway, if you know what brat summer is, then maybe you'll get what feral woman fall is. But really, it sounds kind of intense, but it's not. It's like embracing your true self and as Shelby writes, reclaiming your feminine power in whatever way that's true for you, which I'm all for that. Let's have Feral Woman Fall for sure.
Yeah. To heck with Feral Woman Fall. I feel like it's Feral Woman 365,
Always.
Hopefully. Because, yeah, I'm all for women living authentically. So, Steph, how are you planning to be a feral woman this fall?
You know, I really liked all the points Shelby made about different ways that you can embrace your feral woman. But the ones that I really am trying to live up to this fall is connecting again with nature. I love hiking. I've been getting a little more into running, and I go out to parks when I run. So just getting outside and getting that fresh air and, getting a little activity going and enjoying movement. So that's definitely going to be a big one.
Good.
So, and also embracing my emotions, right?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like
you don't do that already because
I don't know. I think, here's the thing. I always joke about I cry really easily, which is true. I cry all the time. But I tend to be kind of ashamed about being a crier. But you know what? I don't think it's a bad thing to be a crier. That's what my feral woman fall. I'm going to embrace that I cry a lot. It is what it is.
Yeah. Feel your feelings. Yeah. I like that. I'm getting better at forcing myself to relax. That's how I am embracing my feral woman this fall. Often, especially on weekends, I find myself feeling like I need to fill my day with activities or chores, and I am now making more of an effort to sit and do nothing at times, and maybe not nothing. I may sit and read or sit and knit, but my point is that I need to give myself permission to do that. Otherwise, my brain starts thinking, oh, well, I know there's another couple loads of laundry that need to be done, or I need to make sure that my 8-year-old is getting his room cleaned that day. It doesn't matter. I need to take that time for myself. And I think a lot of women could benefit from that. I think we keep learning over and over on this podcast that women take on a lot and we have a lot of balls in the air. And so it's important to take that time to relax and reset. So yeah, and speaking of someone who has a lot of balls in the air, that brings us back to Amanda Bennett, our guest. So let's hear about what she's working on and everything that she's involved with. Amanda, welcome to the Farmhouse. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So, did you always want to work in agriculture?
I didn't actually. I thought I was going to be a Spanish teacher. I went to Ohio State and enrolled in the honors program for Spanish, and thought I was going to be teaching young minds on foreign topics. And I was really interested in languages. I took 2 languages in school, in high school, and I just I was a small town farm girl dumped in a big city of Columbus, and it was eye-opening to know how much people didn't know about agriculture. My roommates, asking me, well, you grew up on a farm, so can't you just go out and grab an ear of corn and eat it? So I and sweet corn and field corn. And it just got me thinking, did a couple of things with my dad that summer and decided, you know what, I feel like I need to be in agriculture. So I changed my major and went into ag business and animal sciences. And that's where I ended up.
I was looking at your bio on the Ohio State Extension website, and your expertise is really broad. So, like, just some of the things listed on the website. This is not even everything. It includes crops, animal science, gardening, beekeeping, farm management, and many other things. So, how do you keep on top of so many different, like, aspects of the ag industry to be able to, help people when they call in to ask you questions?
Yeah, all of that in one day too, by the way. I didn't put that on the website, but how do I keep up? I have a great network. That's the best part about this job is that we are a network. My coworkers are all over the state. I have a coworker in every single county, and beyond that, actually in every single state in the US. So that is a great thing about Extension. I have coworkers, that are specialists in different areas that maybe I'm not more familiar with. Miami County doesn't have a large livestock population in terms of commercial growers. And so I really rely on a lot of my colleagues to help me work through some of those questions. Myself, I think it's a combination of using my colleagues, my network, and local producers that I have relationships with that I learn. I was just out on a farm yesterday, learn about how they do things, and I kind of keep up with that way. I'm a member of several professional organizations that help as well, and I'm just a lifelong learner. I'm always in some sort of training and learning new things every day.
I think we're big fans of being lifelong learners here. We on a recent podcast, we were kind of going around and saying our favorite part of working at Lancaster Farming, and a lot of us were talking about how we enjoy the fact that you learn new things all the time. So do you have a favorite call or question that you've gotten as an extension educator that really stands out to you?
Where to pick. When we get together, we start telling stories and think that we could write a book about all the weird questions that we've gotten.
I'm sure.
One that immediately came to mind, a call, was a woman asking about a certain type of tree in her yard. She said it had small leaves and it wasn't an oak or a maple. What was it? And so I had the opportunity to explain that there are hundreds of trees native to Ohio alone, let alone our, networking system of being able to ship things places and get, imported trees. So that one. And then you didn't really ask this, but people that come into the office, they bring in a mouse one time. I asked, she was concerned that it had bred with her rabbits because it could jump really high. Luckily, it came in when I was at lunch, or I do not like mice.
Would you also have jumped really high?
It would have jumped really high. Came in, and so my office associate was telling me, and I was, thinking this might be kind of like an elderly person or something, but I called the person back, and it was a young person, and I kind of had to explain like the birds and the bees and interspecies relationships. And it was really interesting.
I mean, I guess if you have a question about a live mouse, where else would you take it than your local extension office, right?
Would be so surprised at the things that come through the door or over the phone.
Every day must be an adventure for you, I feel like.
It is.
So I actually first was introduced to your work at the Ohio State's Farm Science Review back in September. And there I attended a talk you gave about hydroponics for small farmers. So do you think growing hydroponically is a bigger benefit for those small farmers who are just kind of adding it into their basements or into their operations? Or is it a bigger benefit for those larger scale farms that grow an entire like train car's worth of produce? Or maybe you think the system works both ways?
I mean, it definitely has its advantages in either system. Commercially, you cut out, you're able to automate a lot of things. You're able to, you have your upfront costs, but you're able to maybe save money in the long run and produce a consistent product that might be really attractive to your end user. and on a year-round basis, regardless of what's going on outside, which is often with farming, any kind of thing outside, you're really weather dependent, as we saw this year. Small farms, I think its advantage, it can be that it can add benefit to what they're already doing. It's probably not going to be full time. It's going to be something that they're kind of adding in on maybe some slower months. If that is part of their operation, it really kind of is determinant upon what their overall plan is, if they depend on farming year round, or if it's just like a bonus during the growing season and maybe they have other winter plans. So I think it can be scaled up or down and benefit, each kind of operation.
Yeah. Personally, I'm kind of fascinated by hydroponic growing. Like it's something that I've like kind of toyed with, like maybe I could try this just in my kitchen, like a little bit of lettuce or something, but then I've never actually committed to it, but I think it's very cool.
Yeah, I do too. I've thought about it too. I have 2 young kids though, and that's what stops me, is that I'm just concerned that my operation is going to get run into or pushed over or something. So maybe when they're a little bit older, I'll be able to try it out.
I just had my first tomato that I grew in my hydroponic, my little unit on my countertop yesterday.
Exciting. How was it?
It tasted great.
Yeah?
My daughter, we had 2, and so there was 4 of us, so we split them each into halves. And my daughter said, "There's just something about the way it tastes better than what we get from the store." And it was like a different file. But yeah, I also grow lettuce in a unit on my countertop, so away from dogs and children as well. Be an option.
So you mentioned that you grew up on a farm, and I think a lot of people might think that there's a bit of a big juxtaposition between being raised on a grain farm and now focusing on things like hydroponics and raised beds and native plants and all of that kind of stuff. Do you think that's a fair assumption, or are there more connections than people may think?
I think that's a great question. I do think there are a lot more connections than people think. I often say that I grew up on a grain farm, but it's really just gardening on a huge scale. The mechanics are the same. You worry about the same things. You worry about insects. You worry about disease. You worry about rain. You worry about too much rain. You worry about the weather or the sun and cold and hot, and all those things affect it, whether it's by the acres or by, small square foot gardening. So we always had a big garden growing up. That was just kind of part of what we did as well. Big canners and freezers and juicers and all those sorts of things. But as far as like kind of the native plants, I'm also a beekeeper, and I got really interested in native plants and just kind of what my bees were foraging and the benefits of some of those. And more so, I probably got involved with those more when I became an extension employee, because I started to learn about how some of these plants that we bring in from their non-native habitats are causing problems with our native plants. And they bring a whole host of other issues, not just in competition with our natives, but their own disease problems. And I was getting calls, about plants that probably shouldn't be planted here. And then they're wanting to, spray things on them and prevent disease that could have been prevented by planting something different.
Could you tell us a little bit more about working with native plant landscaping? I mean, I guess to the average person, why do they need to know that it's important and maybe worth the investment?
They have a lot of benefits. I always say I'm a lazy gardener, and so they require a whole lot less work. They require a lot less nutrients and water and things like fungicides and different pesticides that you might be prone to use if you were, growing your, prized whatever flower, that doesn't normally because that's the problem, is they come here. A perfect example is the blue spruce. I get questions about blue spruce all the time. They are a perfect example of the wrong plant the wrong plant in the wrong climate. We have all kinds of weather in Ohio that is just perfect for fungus, and that's what they're getting. They're getting this fungus, and the only way to prevent that fungus is to spray a fungicide on them. And most of these are, 60, 70 feet tall. You can't do that like economically or even just physically. So The benefits of native plants, why should people care? Like I said, they require a lot less maintenance. They're a lot less disease prone. Um, and our wildlife are adapted to them, any kind of seeds or berries or things. So it provides food for wildlife, provides consistency, and just overall kind of can help be more environmentally friendly.
So what are some steps people can take to incorporate native plant landscaping into their garden or their property?
You can, big or small, it doesn't matter. Sometimes you just being careful of the ones that do reseed themselves. I mean, they're kind of meant to kind of take over. So be careful they're in a spot that you don't mind that. That's kind of where our landscaping kind of habits may be at war with a native planting sort of approach. So just being cognizant of the ones that spread, the ones that need divided, the ones that just need a little bit more, maybe some cutting before winter, things like that. You really can start in any space. You can even put them in containers. You can put them in a small section. Starting small. Really, when I tell people about like what to plant, I always am kind of thinking about wildlife and pollinators and things like that. And the biggest thing is just to make sure you have something in your landscape that is blooming 3 seasons out of 4, which is, so we call it sequential blooming, something that is blooming, spring, summer, and fall.
All right.
So, speaking of pollinators and bees, you mentioned that you're a beekeeper. So, can you tell us how you kind of got started in beekeeping? And then, is this something that you think, the general public or farmers should consider adding to their life, to their operations?
Yeah, maybe. How I got started, like any good thing, my little sister got me into it. She said that, we were literally sitting at lunch one day, and she said that she'd heard about, the decline in the bee population. This was before I started an extension. Both of us had, there was 4 kids between the 2 of us under the age of 2. So we thought, what better time to start a small population than when you have all these little kids that shouldn't be around bees. So that started some researching. I didn't even know where you bought insects. I didn't even really know you could buy insects. And we just started. We got kind of paired up with off of back when Craigslist was still a thing. I feel like that's kind of gone to the wayside. But just got paired up with a guy in a nearby city, and he brought us out. We, asked him all the questions. He sold us some bees, and we actually went to an extension ran. At that time, I really didn't know, but an extension ran a bee conference and learned a lot of stuff and made a lot of mistakes on the way. And that's pretty much how you do it, right? And hobbies are pretty, they're just that, they're not money making necessarily. They're usually pretty expensive. But we started, we had a great time with it. And we've been doing it for about 12 years. And as far as if people should add it to their current operations, I mean, that is completely the time that they have and what they would like to get out of it. I'm actually teaching a beekeeping class here in my county starting next week. And I do this every couple of years, and it always seems like there are people interested in it. I also teach at the Southwest Ohio Beekeepers School. I teach a beginners track, and probably about 80 to 90% of those people do not have bees. They're just interested. And I teach it to about 200 people each year. And I'm always amazed at the comments at the end that say, after your presentation, I decided not to, or I don't have time, or I'm going to research and wait. And so I do hope I bring that perspective of like, this is the real deal. This, it takes time. It is not sitting boxes out and then coming back a couple months later and harvesting a great amount of honey. That is not realistic. It requires time during the summer months. It requires, fully dressing your bee suit when it's 90 degrees outside. So, I mean, it's hard work. It requires a lot of lifting. It requires a lot of trial and error. But that's part of the learning process.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like that is something that people might assume is like, oh, you just stick the hives out there and there they are, there's the bees, and then that's it. But it's like, no, it's a little more to it than that.
Yeah.
It is.
even if they're saying like, I've decided this isn't for me, I mean, then I would still say like mission accomplished. You've definitely educated them enough to make an informed decision, even if that decision is, I'm not going to keep bees right now.
I do consider that a win. I think, or not a win, but I consider it, yeah, mission accomplished for sure.
Okay, so I know you mentioned having blooms 3 out of 4 seasons, but aside from that, what can people do to support bees, some of which might be part of a colony on a neighboring farm or apiary?
Um, so things that you can do to support bees and pollinators in general are to kind of some of these things we've been talking about, planting the right plants for your landscape so that you're not feeling the need to spray things that might be harmful to bees. If you are spraying things, spraying them in the late evening is better after the bee activity has kind of died down for the day, because it has a whole chance many hours to break down and become less harmful. That's usually how those pesticides work. So it's yeah, choosing the right plants so that you don't have to do some of these other things. It's providing the blooms. Lawn care, plays a big part of it. A lot of people don't like weeds, but maybe becoming more appreciative of some of these weeds might be helpful too. They provide a lot of food. Dandelions and clover are, dandelions are one of the first things that blooms in the season, and it provides a whole lot of pollen for pollinators early on when they're trying to build their colonies to get ready for the clover harvest. Basically, that's the big flush in Ohio, the clover harvest. So it's really, reducing your pesticide use through, good choices in plants, through appreciation of, maybe what you might consider a weed, planting native plants again for some of those benefits that we talked about, and just being knowledgeable about, the placement of them and, what you might be doing to interact with them and things like that.
So that brings us to our final question to wrap up the interview, which is, what does being a woman in ag mean to you?
I think it's a lot easier than it used to be. So I do feel kind of grateful for that. I just appreciate the opportunity to be part of an industry that has been beneficial in my life, that has been beneficial to my upbringing, that has taught me a lot of values and hard work ethic. And I feel grateful to be able to represent that industry. And hopefully I'm doing that in a good way.
It's so great talking to Amanda. It's incredible just like the vast amount of expertise she has and everything that she deals with on a daily basis working with extension.
Yeah, I feel like they should write that book.
I would read it. Absolutely.
I would too. I mean, they could, do some work, maybe change a few details, make things anonymous for the sake of people's pride, perhaps, if they're but I would read the heck out of that book for more stories about jumping mice and whatnot.
For sure. And it was interesting hearing her talk about what you can do to help the bees and how simple some of those steps are, which is just like, don't stress about dandelions, which is kind of funny to me because maybe I should care more, but like I just don't care that much about what my lawn looks like ever. Like I have dandelions. I love clover. I don't really understand people not liking clover because I think clover is lovely. Don't know where that problem came from, but like growing up, my parents were also very like chill about their lawn, and still now. They live in, it's more prominent I think where they live than where I live, but they live in this very small development that's just like kind of one loop of a street. And you drive their tiny street in the springtime and they are the only house where there are dandelions growing, which is just so strange to me because you know what? I don't think dandelions are as ugly as people make them out to be. Like, it's yellow. Leave it. They're fine. They're fine.
My only beef with dandelions is that I'm really allergic to them.
Okay, that's fair.
You know what? If I'm not like shoving my face into them, I'm generally okay. We have a lot of dandelions in our yard, especially now that I have, my kids love to pick them when like they're in the little
yeah.
puffball
You make a
range
wish and you
blow. And so now we have more dandelions than ever. It's kind of nice to hear that what we kind of see as maybe being, I don't know, like lazy or just not staying on top of your property is actually good for nature. And that's something that I definitely need to like sit with and be okay with, because of my husband and I tend to be the one who gets a little more anxious about making sure that the yard looks trim and neat. I worry about like making sure our house fits in with our neighbors. It's like, oh, both the neighbors have mowed and our house looks like, you know, a shag carpet. But I do need to kind of, I think, loosen up the reins on that, which I'm sure my husband would appreciate, because he's kind of the one who usually presses back and is like, no, it's not good to mow the grass that often. You need to let it go a little bit more. Yeah. So I'm sure he'd be pleased.
It is interesting. Like, I mean, society has really pushed the narrative of that like perfect lawn and the whole like keeping up with the Joneses and all that nonsense. But I do think it's very slowly shifting a little bit, right? Like I think people are becoming more aware of the fact that if you just let the weeds be and let the grass grow a little longer, like it's very beneficial to wildlife and insects. And then kind of the same in the fall, if you don't panic about your leaves right away, like it actually benefits the soil if you just let them do their thing. So very slowly, there are still so many people that are very nitpicky about their lawns, but I am not one of them.
Yeah. I'm willing to get on board with this. You know, we're big fans of pollinators here. You can't see us right now, but Steph and I are both wearing pro-pollinator shirts. She's got a shirt that says "Plant these to save the bees," and it's all different kinds of flowers that bees love. And I'm wearing a shirt with a bat on it that says "Protect our nocturnal pollinators."
Which, we did absolutely plan this, knowing that we were talking to Amanda today. We're like, we should wear pollinator shirts because we both own them, which is amazing. So, pro-pollinators at this podcast.
Ooh, and next week's episode drops on Halloween, so we thought we would do a little extra treat for you, a trick or treat, if you will.
Yes, a little trick or treat for you guys.
Yeah, so instead of interviewing someone in next week's show, Steph and I are preparing a few fun, spooky tales from farms, or I know in one case, a farmer's market, and we'll be sharing those with you next week. So get ready for something new, and hopefully we'll have some fun. So thank you all for listening. If you liked this episode, please consider subscribing if you haven't already done so. If you really liked this episode, please consider leaving us a review.
If you have any questions or thoughts about this episode or the podcast in general, you can email us at farmhouse@lancasterfarming.com.
You can also find us on social media at Lancaster Farming on most platforms.
Thank you again for listening and visiting the farmhouse. I'm Stephanie.
I'm Candace.
And we'll talk to you later.
Bye.
This episode of The Farmhouse is copyright 2024 by Lancaster Farming newspaper, part of the Steinman Communications family.
It was written by Stephanie Spiker and Candace Rosbowski. It was produced by Eric Herlock. The music you've heard throughout the show is courtesy of Tin Bird Shadow.